What is happening, everybody? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast here on YouTube. My name's Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Appreciate you joining me. I'm going to kick things off today with the news that the Bears have signed Mike Pettine as their new senior defensive assistant, not a defensive coordinator. For those of you who have been following the Bears along at home, they recently named Sean Desai as their new defensive coordinator. So Mike Pettine will take the reins as a senior defensive assistant. And I know everyone got their jokes off and memes out on Twitter about, nobody being afraid of Mike Pettine being with the Bears. And of course, what Mike Pettine's now with the Bears, Dom Capers is with the Lions. What's next? Are we going to see, Bob Slowick go back and be an assistant for the Vikings? Are we going to see Ron Zook end up with the Vikings? Like, everyone's getting their jokes off, right? And I understand to an extent. I get the fact that a lot of people weren't happy with how Mike Pettine handled things as defensive coordinator in Green Bay. And if you feel that way, you're certainly not super upset about him going to a division rival and maybe having Green Bay take advantage of some of those deficiencies that he had as defensive coordinator in Green Bay. But I think this is actually a really nice hire for Chicago, if we're being honest here. So first of all, he's not their defensive coordinator, right? They're going to have a specific defensive coordinator that's, tasked with calling plays, setting up the scheme and everything like that. But when you have a new defensive coordinator like Chicago has, it's really great to have a known commodity like Mike Pettine, who's, called defensive plays in the league, who knows every play imaginable known to man. We saw early in his career, he has an extensive blitz package. He just decided not to use it anymore these past couple seasons for the most part. So this is a nice hire, though. This is somebody that's going to really be able to, round out that defensive staff for Chicago. He knows Green Bay obviously very well. He knows the division really well, including Minnesota as well as Detroit. So there's a lot of bonuses there for Chicago. And again, especially with the fact that they have a younger defensive coordinator who hasn't called plays before, that's putting together schemes and game plans, at least is the sole person in charge of that for the first time. So having a veteran defensive presence like Mike Pettine certainly is going to add to their staff. Now, the big thing here is that I'm not sure what this does for the Packers, Bears, and if it makes the Bears any more of a formidable opponent, right? Of course, getting good minds on defense is certainly going to help them. But I think the expectation, if you're a Packer fan, is that when you're facing Chicago with Khalil Mack and Eddie Goldman coming back, Akeem Hicks, we'll see how that roster shapes out. But Roquan Smith, etc., Eddie Jackson, that they're going to have a good defense, right? That's kind of the assumption. And if you're a Packer fan right now, it's not the defense that you're extra concerned about. You're already concerned about it. You're just making sure that offense stays not great or even good or even average or even probably below average, right? They're a bad offense. And right now the thought process is, who do they end up getting at quarterback? There's been some Carson Wentz rumors. There's been some Gardner Minshew rumors. They could just obviously bring back Nick Foles. Maybe they'll bring back Mitch Trubisky. Fingers are still firmly crossed. But either way, that's going to be the bigger thing. Is Allen Robinson out of town? Jimmy Graham's not getting younger. Can they fix their offensive line in any capacity? David Montgomery, obviously still there, very good, but that offense does not scare anyone in any way, shape, or form with its current set of players. So nice for the Bears that they get Mike Pettine, a veteran presence that they can bounce things off of. Of course, he's, I'm sure, going to have a little bit of extra motivation going against the Packers when they face them 2 times a year over the course of the next few seasons, or however long Mike Pettine is in Chicago. But overall, I'm not sure how much this totally moves the needle. But if we're giving credit to the Bears, which we don't, usually get to do, I think this was a nice hire by them, and I think it ultimately made a lot of sense. Again, I think the biggest thing, knowing the division, maybe wanting some revenge with the Packers, having some ideas to bounce off of for a young coordinator, makes sense all the way around, and I think Chicago deserves credit for that hire. All right, next thing I wanted to take a look at today is free agency, right? The big topic right now is, what can Green Bay do to improve this team? And for those of you who have been following on Twitter, you know that Green Bay is very, very much in salary cap sort of hell at the moment. They're not in a great spot. They're going to have to do a ton of restructures and releases just to get to an operating level so that they can get under the cap. Period, much less sign players. And that means right now, even the Corey Linsleys, the Aaron Joneses, the Kevin Kings, the Jamal Williams, those guys are on the outside looking in because Green Bay just doesn't have the money. And for those saying, well, maybe you could put a franchise tag or a transition tag on Aaron Jones, which even I've proposed the transition tag for Aaron Jones. Green Bay still has to get well below cap in order to have the salary cap room to tag him, because as soon as you tag him, that salary cap figure immediately goes on your books. A lot of the contracts you can release and get more money post June 1st, but you don't actually get that money until June 1st to spend. So it doesn't actually help you come free agency. So it's really, really tricky. And I know the mantra is trust Russ Ball and trust Gutekunst and that, but they have some major, and I mean major, salary cap logistics. And people have talked about the Aaron Rodgers, the Devontae Adams, the Bakhtiari contracts, maybe putting some stuff to next year, cutting Preston Smith, Dean Lowry, Rick Wagner, Christian Kirksey. You do all of that stuff and you're still basically bare minimum below the cap. So hold off on free agency talking, for now, because even if they do some major restructuring and borrow immensely from future salary caps, any sort of top tier free agent is basically outside out of the realm of possibility. And honestly, about the best case scenario, if they are going to add a big name player, it's probably Corey Linsley or Aaron Jones would likely be the case. If they're likely going to hand out a big contract this offseason, my guess is it's to one of those players, not probably somebody off the streets. I think the other thing that you really have to look at here for Green Bay is how they kind of navigate this from a free agency and compensatory pick standpoint. So let's say Green Bay does decide that they're not going to be able to re-sign Corey Linsley or Aaron Jones. Those are the two big ones, right? There's a chance that maybe you could get a third and a fourth, maybe a couple fourths, maybe at worst a fourth and a fifth round compensatory pick for those two players. As much as people don't like Kevin King, he is still basically a first round corner. I know it was basically second or first pick of the second round, but basically a first round corner with size, speed, strength, athleticism. And he's been a starter in this league for 4 years, and corners are tough to come by. You don't have to look further than like the Mackenzie Alexanders and the Trey Wayans, people who have struggled mightily, who still got paid major contracts. Some team is probably going to pay Kevin King some money. Jamal Williams might get a decent deal. You could legitimately be looking at maybe 2/4, a fifth, and a sixth round pick in compensatory picks coming up. And if that's the case, if Green Bay decides to let all four of those players walk and they do end up getting nice contracts where Green Bay is going to get some nice compensatory picks back, Green Bay may very well ignore unrestricted free agency altogether and stick with players who were released. And the reason being is released players do not count towards that compensatory formula, as I'm sure most of you know. So anyone that's released, you can sign, and they don't count at all towards that formula. So all those players that you're getting picks for because they signed with other teams, normally if you sign a free agent, it would cancel one of those off. But because you're signing a player that's a street free agent because they were released by their team, they do not count towards the compensatory formula. And because of the salary cap hell that every team, for the most part, is going to be going through, not every team, but probably 2/3 of them, there are going to be more released players that can help your team than ever before. So as you're looking at that list of unrestricted free agents right now, understand that I think there's a really good chance that Green Bay doesn't dabble in that at all. They're going to be looking at players who were cut. Now, AJ Bouye was cut, prior to recording this episode. He was, released on Wednesday. So, he could be a player. He's not, because he's probably going to get more money on the market than Green Bay has, but he could be a player that Green Bay signs and doesn't count towards that compensatory formula. And there are going to be a plethora of players who are released because of the salary cap issues that teams have across the league. So don't necessarily look at the free agent list now. Look at players who are getting released, and there are going to be a ton of them over the course of the next couple weeks and next couple months. So keep an eye out for those. Those are probably the players that Green Bay is shopping from. And then look at bargains, veterans that are later in their career that could come in and still help a team, maybe on a veteran minimum or slightly above veteran minimum type of deal. More of your Devin Funchesses, your Christian Kirkseys, even your Rick Wagners to some extent. I would expect them to maybe have a free agency very much like last year, where you're getting maybe a couple, maybe not minimum guys, but a couple mid-tier guys, and then like a Devin Funchess where you're just kind of taking a waiver on him. That's the type of free agency I expect out of Green Bay. All of those were released players, very similar to this season, and that's why Green Bay has so many comp picks coming in this season, is because they stayed away from unrestricted free agency. The one caveat to that is that usually at the end of April, early May, after the draft, that compensatory formula stops. So anyone that's a free agent after that period no longer counts towards the compensatory selection. So let's take somebody like a James White, right? Let's say James White doesn't get any of that immediate money on the free agent market, and come end of April, early May, he's still sitting on the free agent list past that date when teams can sign players that are unrestricted free agents and no longer have them count towards the compensatory formula. Then Green Bay could get involved and say, hey, James White, you are still on the market. We would love to have you. And because they would sign him after that point, they would not count towards that compensatory formula. So when you're looking at that free agent list right now, you might see some names that are really sexy and appealing. One, Green Bay doesn't have the money in all likelihood. Two, even if they did, because they're going to probably lose some players like Lindsley, Aaron Jones, Kevin King, they're probably going to want to get those compensatory picks back next year. So expect them to instead look at released players or players who are still available at the end of free agency. One other piece of news, Ben Fennell tweeted out that Green Bay faced single high safety on 60% of the snaps this past year, which was fourth highest in the league. And first of all, that's a really great job by Green Bay getting teams in that look. And the reason they're able to get that is because they're sticking to the run, running the football so consistently, and teams are worried about Aaron Jones in that running game. And really some of the intermediate and play action stuff, the bootlegs, they're all things that are sucking those defenders forward. That allows you some of those deep shots down the field, like we saw in MVS in the NFC Championship game to Tampa Bay, which if memory serves, I believe was a single high look. But I think you're going to start seeing this more often. I think you're going to see teams go single high. And I think they're going to try to take away the run, especially if Green Bay gets a power run game going with A.J. Dillon. An extra guy in the box would certainly help against that. Trying to shut down Robert Tonyan, that safety is going to hedge to the side of Davante Adams. And teams are going to say, hey, if you've got MVS on the outside, we're going to make sure, we're going to press him on the outside. We're going to try to get pressure. We're going to cut off all the intermediate. We're going to hedge to Davante Adams' side. And we're going to make you beat us down the field with MVS. And we've seen, right, that MVS can beat you, but it's inconsistent. And they're willing to say, hey, if you connect on 3 or 4 shots to MVS down the field and you get 4 50-yard touchdowns, tip of the cap. But you look back at that Tampa Bay game, right? Multiple shots to MVS on the outside. There were 3 of them that Green Bay had a single high look and there was a go route and Rodgers had a chance to hit him. Rodgers hit on one of them. All 3 of them had similar separation. Rodgers hit on one, got the touchdown. The other 2 he missed on. And Tampa Bay is saying that's where we're going to make you attack. There's a weakness in every defense, and that right now is where Green Bay has to attack. But Tampa's saying, you know what? We're going to make it be Aaron Rodgers deep to MVS. We don't think you can consistently complete that through the course of the game. Tampa was right. They only hit on one of the 3. And because of it, Green Bay, ultimately, and because of a trillion other things as well, but, ultimately, ended their season in the NFC Championship game. So how do you counteract that? I know the wide receiver topic is always in vogue in Green Bay, but man, getting a really super high-end wide receiver opposite of Davante Adams would be amazing. But the same token, you have to remember, Green Bay's not going to have the money. You're usually not going to get a first-round pick who has that type of talent on the outside as a wide receiver. Even if you're picking at the end of the first round, even if you move up a little bit, you're usually not getting that type of guy. And really, that's taking MVS and Allen Lazard potentially off the field. If you're going to spend, you're probably going to want to shore up that offensive line. So I think your biggest hope right here is that MVS really takes that next step, takes a leap, and really reaches his potential, because there's more there for MVS. And I know he's let you down, and I know he's frustrating at times, but we've seen him have put together some really great games this last season. If he can just find that level of consistency, he really has the opportunity to be something special as teams continue to give that look on the outside. So if you're looking for or praying that one player really makes a jump this year, MVS might be that guy, because he could open up just a ridiculous amount of possibilities within this Packers offense. I know we've been saying that for basically like 3 years now, but it seems more relevant than ever with teams playing so much single high against Green Bay. Hey, thanks so much for joining me today. Also, thanks for listening yesterday. Not many people can talk about Isaac Nauta for 8 minutes and have people listen in. So I appreciate you so incredibly much for doing that. I appreciate you following along and subscribing. Make sure to check out our audio version of the podcast today, wherever you get your favorite podcast. It's going to do it for me. Until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.